When you hear the word finance, what's the first thought that crosses your mind? If you're like 99% of people are entrepreneurs, the thought of having to look at or deal with your numbers brings fear or dread. Let's be honest, finance has never been a sexy topic. Most hate having to deal with or even talk about their numbers or finances because they're often viewed as scary, confusing, confronting, or just plain boring as batshit. Here's the thing. Finance doesn't have to be overwhelming or intimidating, and it can actually be quite a fun and stimulating topic because making money, becoming more successful, and creating more wealth is vital if you want to build a thriving and sustainable business and/or provide a strong financial foundation for your family. I created Financial Foreplay back in 2009 as a way to demystify finance, and I've been using my proprietary methodologies and strategies based on science to make complex financial concepts accessible to everyone. I want to give you the knowledge you need in order to become even more successful at growing your business or building real wealth for your family. And I'm also going to introduce you to some global experts so that you can learn from the best. And we're going to be speaking with some trailblazing individuals and entrepreneurs so you can really benefit from their stories, challenges, and triumphs. Financial Foreplay is a registered trademark, which is why there is only one Financial Foreplay, and you should only ever strive and settle for the best. It's time to slip into something a little bit more comfortable because we're about to dive in and begin.
Can you keep my secret?
Anyone who's ever been in a relationship wants to know the secret to making love and that elusive spark that everyone talks about last forever. And let's be clear, even though everyone's relationship is unique, there are certain keys or secrets to be learned from those who have managed to really keep that spark alive. And make no mistake, couples that practice financial foreplay together stay together, which is why it's absolutely vital for you to learn how to keep that financial spark alive in your relationship. Even if your romance started off as 50 Shades of Grey, it's easy to see how busy work schedules or early morning meetings, grocery shopping, dishes in the sink, or even crying toddlers can really test the connection that you've got. And when you introduce the financial pressures of buying a home or investing or planning for your retirement, it's not surprising for that spark to fade and perhaps become a little boring or predictable. In fact, according to a new survey by Ramsey Solutions, money fights are the second leading cause of divorce behind infidelity. Our guest today is the perfect person to advise you on how to maintain the romance when your romantic fantasy has become a little ho-hum or even downright limp. I want to welcome to the show today Batya Shulman, who's a chartered accountant and a licensed financial advisor with over 23 years of international banking and financial services experience. She was born in South Africa. She went to university in Australia, and she's lived and worked in Sydney, New York, Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Singapore. Prior to moving into wealth management, she was actually a CFO at one of our Australian banks. As a working mother of 3 young boys, she 100% understands that people often have the best of intentions in managing their wealth, but they often put themselves last. Batya is committed to providing her clients with really holistic, personalized advice to help them reach and achieve their long-term goals and objectives. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm really excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Well, look, let's get stuck in because money and finances are the most common causes of stress and strain, even in the strongest of relationships. Can you explain to our listeners why that is?
Sure. I think every relationship comes with baggage, and money is often the weightiest bag. When we talk about money in relationships of any kind, we're bound to find some differences, frustration, and tension. So no matter how much you love your partner or your spouse, trying to merge your lives and your money can be a very bumpy ride. Let's think about it. Everyone comes from different personal experiences. Everyone has different backgrounds and life experiences. And the way you perceive and internalize those experiences are probably very different. And this influences the way you think and treat money. So that's why couples often have very, very different views on money. And let's face it, when we're talking about money and finances, this is not the most fun or sexiest of topics to start off with. And you couple that with the different ways of thinking, you're really adding a whole nother level of challenges. But it doesn't have to be that way. And the key to any good relationship starts with communication, mutual understanding, and respect for each other's views. So
How
let's
does that play out in specifically in finances? How do you get better communication, mutual understanding, and respect?
okay. So to get that mutual understanding, you have to communicate. Okay, and sometimes when you're sitting with your partner or your spouse, you're communicating about so many things that the last thing you wanted to communicate is about money and finances. So, but it's so important. You have to talk to them about their financial history. You need to talk about your fears, your aspirations, your dreams. And what I talk about is understanding your values, your goals, and what you dream about as individually and as a couple. It's so important, and it's also so important to discuss together your lifestyle choices. And I'll give you a perfect example. Say, for example, you're working and you're earning $10,000 a month, and your spouse likes shopping, likes fine dining, and you're spending around $12,000 a month. So you've got a deficit of $2,000 a month. This is going to add so much stress in your life and so much stress in your personal relationship. So it's so important that you actually sit down and talk and you communicate about your lifestyle needs and your wants and what you're aspiring to grow towards.
How do you see couples that have really different, disparate financial history and fears? How do you see that playing out with clients that you've worked with?
Look, everyone's going to have different views and different goals. So the first thing is communicating so you can understand each other, being open and transparent. Okay, don't lie. It's a foundation of a very bad relationship. Sometimes compromise, and understanding what you want to reach together as a couple. Because if you're going to be investing or if you're going to be managing your money, everything you're doing should be working towards your goals and your objectives. So if you and your partner have very different views on what you want to achieve in life, then you actually probably have to look at your relationship in a whole. But if you say you want to buy a property together, then this is a common goal. And then together you will work as a team how to get there. So the important thing is to find the common goals, find the common objective, and think about it as teamwork.
That's a really great point. Do you find that the couples that are in most distress or that are having the bumpiest ride are the ones that they're doing their own thing? They're not actually working together towards anything?
Correct. You need to work together. Now, the most important thing is set up a budget, set up a plan, set up goals and objective steps of how you're going to achieve that. Now, what you may find often is, all right, you both may want to buy that property, but your spouse may want to buy that fancy car and you may want to study for an MBA, and you both got your individual goals. So what you would do then is you'd have a joint investment pool or joint account that's working towards that property purchase. And then individually, you have separate things that are helping you work towards your individual goals. But you're being open, you're being transparent, and you're communicating with each other.
So everyone knows that they've got to do a budget, but very few people do it. How do you make budgeting fun? Like, what can couples do to make it a little bit more exciting and sexy?
Oh, sexy. Okay. So first thing that you need to do is you need to spice it up. You need to schedule in a date night. Now, this cannot be done at home, okay? Because if you're going to be talking to your partner while they're sitting on the sofa watching Netflix, it's not going to happen. You've got to get out. So you've got to make a formal date night where you get out of the house and you have a specific agenda that you're going to talk about. Now, there are lots of different ideas around making this date night fun. You can have themes. You can take turns in organizing it. Say an example is one date night, you've got to see who can spend the least amount of money. So you can plan to go for a walk or have a picnic. If you want to have something really nice, you may go to your favorite restaurant, dress up, have a beautiful glass of wine, and then talk about what's important to you. You can play games, incorporate some quizzes. One of my favorite things to do is to ask each other questions. And then you can take pen and paper, write down what you think the other person is going to say, and then you share it with each other afterwards. One of my favorite questions is say, okay, what if you were to win the $10 million lotto? What would you do with that money? You get so much insight into a person with what they would do with that money. And you get to learn a lot about them. And another thing to do is make each other accountable. If, for example, you are facing some financial difficulties, you can have a challenge with each other. See who can spend the least amount of money in 1 month. Make it a competition, make it fun, and then revisit it on the next date night. So keep it interesting, keep it different, but you have to get it out of the house, put some effort into it. Any relationship, anything to work requires effort, and make it fun.
How often do you think that couples should be scheduling this time to talk about their finances and keep that spark alive?
Oh, it depends on everyone's circumstances, but I would say at least once a month. Once a month, make an effort to go out and talk about it. It doesn't have to be the whole evening conversation, but if you're having these regular conversations, it'll help you stay on track to what you want to achieve. If you want to do a formal budgeting or formal planning exercise, that you probably only have to do annually with a maybe every 6 month check-in, or a check-in when there's been a major life change. If you're having a baby or you want to purchase a house, or, some people would lost their jobs during COVID, this then would warrant another date night, a very important conversation that you may need to have. But if you do it on a regular basis, it becomes embedded in part of your lives, and it becomes much easier. And once you do it more frequently, the easier it is, the more fun it is, and the better your relationship.
What do you advise listeners who maybe have a spouse that is a bit shy to talk about these things? They may have some shame or some discomfort around, talking about numbers and finances. What do you recommend that they do to kind of get the ball rolling?
Good question. And generally, in most relationships, you're always going to have one person who's probably more dominant or stronger in finance. So naturally, you're always going to have one person who's going to be doing the budget and controlling the numbers. But that's fine as long as you communicate with each other. I know in my relationship, I'm the numbers person. I do the budget every 6 months, but I share it with my partner. He's not interested, but I make him interested. I tell him where we are. I include him. I involve him in those discussions. And it's with anything in a relationship. You need to be inclusive. You need to share. You can, like I said, allocate it to one person, but involve, communicate, and see it like probably going back to what I said earlier. this money, your finances, are working towards your common goals. So you need to have a vested interest. You need to be involved and understand what's going on.
So, what do you recommend if you've got a couple that's got really different views on money and even different perspectives of what they want to invest in? How do you work together with them to get that common ground?
Sometimes it requires compromising and sometimes discussing that through. So often, if you have both partners that are working and have their own incomes, what you could do is you could do something joint as a couple, and you can do individual things. What's very important and why it's useful to seek financial advice is when you would see a financial advisor, the financial advisor would go through all these important steps and help you think about some of your values, your objectives. They would talk to you about your risk profiles. And this is very interesting because I often have couples who come in to me, and one person would say, "Oh, I'm a very adventurous investor," and the other person would say, "Oh, I'm very conservative." But as the meeting progresses, we actually realize that what they think they are is something very different. So it all comes down to, again, communicating, sometimes compromising, working towards your goals, and if need be, do your own individual things, plus do something joint together.
It almost feels like the financial advisor is a bit like a therapist for the couple, helping them and really kind of pushing them to get to be a bit more adventurous and to get to try things that they hadn't done before.
A financial advisor should really be helping you to work toward what your objectives are. So if you came to me and you said, Batya, I want to retire in 5 years' time with $2 million, and you've never invested before, I'm going to look at you and say that, well, that's a very tough path to go down, and we may have to have some of those very hard conversations. So what a financial advisor would do is understand your objectives, understand what you're trying to achieve, and work out how realistic it is to achieve it and how you can get there.
Do you have any interesting examples that you can share with the listeners of various couples that you've worked with where there was a lot of disparity in how, you were able to achieve a bit more common ground?
To reach some common grounds, it's really, like I said before, it's looking at your personal goals and objectives. And, when it's the same with, retirement planning, what I would ask is, where do you want to live when you stop working or when you retire? And if one person's going to want to live in Sydney and the other person wants to live in Bangkok or Phuket or wherever they are, then we're facing some issues. So it's really about opening up those conversations. You may actually be on very different paths, and then you have to really consider, am I with the right person, or is there a compromise? A lot of people live in the now, and they don't like to plan for the future, but planning for the future is so important. And having these important discussions about where you want to be one day is absolutely critical.
Do you think that has changed over the recent generations due to social media, that this sort of living in the now thing has become more prevalent?
Yes, so many people live in the now. But what is interesting is that a recent study was done by the World Economic Forum. This is a global study, and it showed that people are not only living longer, but on average, they are running out of money 10 years before they die. And women, on average, are living 5 years longer. So what this is showing you is that, first of all, people underestimate how long they're going to live, but people have been spending way too much money in the now and not really planning for the future. And because we are living longer, we actually have to start planning even earlier. We have to start saving even more because we are living till 90, 95, and some people are living to that 100 years old. And if you planned to, live to 80 and then you live to 100, that's 20 years additional expenses you're going to need. That's a lot of money. You've got to have an emergency fund. You've got to have a well-diversified portfolio. But keeping your money in cash is not going to work for you in the long term. And that's probably people's biggest misconception, is holding on to too much cash at the moment.
What do you recommend for the average couple in terms of having that emergency fund? How many months would you recommend?
Okay, so that would vary from individual to individual, but as a basic rule of thumb, it should be between 4 to 6 months of your monthly expenses. And I'll give you an example. If you spend $10,000 a month, your emergency fund would be between $40,000 to $60,000. But if you're single and you don't have any children, you're in a stable job, that 45 months would be sufficient. But if you've got children and you've got elderly parents that you support, and your job may be a little bit unstable, I would hold minimum 6 months plus a little more to help you sleep well at night. So your emergency fund is really your peace of mind. It's your liquid assets that if something was to happen to you, you could quickly liquidate. If you were to lose your job, yes, yeah.
With interest being at an all-time low, what do you recommend right now that people consider as investments? Because a lot of people probably also bank on their house being one of their biggest investments.
Number one, always hold your emergency fund. So anything above your emergency fund, you can invest. Whatever you invest in needs to be very, very well diversified. And it goes back to that common concept of don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't invest in one company. Make sure that you're very well diversified across a range of different asset classes, different investment types, different geographies. Don't just hold stock, hold some bonds, different kinds of bonds, hold different kinds of equities. Global diversification is important. So the more diversified you are, the better, because if something's going to be moving up, something may be moving down. So it's well diversified and minimizes your risk. And another very important thing to remember is any investment has risk involved. And any investment, you should take a medium to long-term view. This is not investing for the future. It's not about buying and selling unless you're a day trader. I don't recommend that. Anything that you would invest, have a time view of 5 years plus, even longer, because markets are volatile, and there may be risks involved, depends on how markets are doing. So take a medium to long-term view, invest in a well-diversified portfolio, have your emergency fund, never underestimate the impact of inflation, and also make sure that what you are investing in is aligned with your personal goals and objectives. I cannot emphasize that enough. Just because your neighbor is investing in cryptocurrency or something very high risk doesn't mean that you have to follow them. You should really only invest in something you understand and something that is going to work towards what you want to achieve.
Well, that's some really great advice. Could you, just for the benefit of the listeners, if you had to give them 2 or 3 tips that you think are really, really important that they need to be thinking about in keeping the financial spark alive with their spouse, coming out of COVID, hopefully for 2021, what would you recommend? What are your top 2 or 3 tips?
I think 2021 is going to be continued volatility. There are many things that going into this year is that will have determine how the market works. COVID is unfortunately not under control. It all actually depends on the rollout of the vaccine, and how different countries roll that out, and how different countries are going to start opening up their borders and how they manage that. Government stimulus packages, all of this is going to impact the market. Markets react to investors' sentiment. So I think there's going to be continued volatility. So people need to be aware of that. So again, you cannot time the market. No one has a crystal ball. No one knows, what tomorrow is going to bring and how markets are going to do. So going back to my advice on what people can do, my advice would actually be the same, whether we're in a COVID situation or non-COVID situation. Invest for the medium to long term in a well-diversified portfolio, and make sure that it's working towards your goals, because you don't know what's going to happen. But a very, very important thing that I also say to people is you need to think logically and not emotionally when it comes to investments.
Well, that's fantastic advice. I'm so thrilled that you were able to come on today and share all of this stuff with us, because let's be honest. Finance is just one of those things that's difficult to talk about. It's difficult for individuals to talk about, let alone couples. So I'm really, really glad that you could share with the listeners some tips on not only how to keep the financial spark alive by keeping those communication lines open, by making time to go on those dates, but also some really good tips of, just because we had COVID doesn't mean that you need to change your investment strategy or investment thinking. There are a lot of strategies and parallels that we can draw upon from previous years that are still valid today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure being here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, and have a great day.